So in this video I'm going to focus on the workshop itself, and I want to give you a bit of an origin story as well as a shop tour. So we live in a nice little country house that was originally built in 1848. Despite the house being small, we fell in love with the property, and it's not hard to see why. It features mature trees, a small pond, and we moved in 2007. For the first few years, the workshop was in an unheated barn that you see here. Now the barn is hand-hewn timber frame structure that's original to the property, and it's pretty enough that it was actually featured in some Ford truck commercials that aired as an opener for the PBS television show A Craftsman's Legacy.
The Ford F-150, a proud supporter of A Craftsman's Legacy.
In spite of its aesthetic appeal, since we live in Michigan, the barn was either always too hot or too cold to work in comfortably, so we decided to build a new shop. Initially, we were going to build a heated garage that would serve primarily as a wood shop, but we ran into zoning problems and couldn't build it where we wanted. So we decided to go bigger and build an addition to the house. Of course, I did the initial design of the addition using Sketchup. So in 2012, we tore off the old three-season sunroom that was on the back of the house and built the addition, the basement of which would become the shop. It's been a very rewarding project, and finishing the details like building decks, building our kitchen, and making furniture has been the primary use of the woodshop over the past few years. When it came time to lay out the shop itself, I of course again used SketchUp. Here you can see just the basement, with the basic foundation and walls shown. It's a walkout basement with French doors that show as an opening in the foundation here. These make it easy to get materials and tools into the shop and projects out. As for the amount of space, I just did the calculation, and the main part of the shop totals 638 square feet. 720 if you include the hallway here that serves mostly as storage. When laying out the shop, I tried to consider where to place tools to optimize shop workflow and allow for material in-feed and out-feed and make the best use of space. There's a pool table that spends most of its life as a shop assembly table. That tends to be where I start. Rough lumber comes in the shop and gets stacked there. Next, I often do some rough rip or resaw cuts on the bandsaw to size the rough material. Then it moves to the jointer to prepare the first two faces flat and square. Then the planer to plane to final thickness. The next step is usually a rip cut on the table saw to cut the board to width, and then finally to the sliding miter saw to cut to length. Finished material, if needed, can be stored in a wood storage rack on the back wall. There's a workbench I use for hand tool work on one wall and a lathe and drill press on another. Until quite recently, I used a portable 2-horsepower dust collector, but I recently upgraded to a cyclone dust collection system I found used on Facebook Marketplace. That's when I was last working on this model, trying to sort out the dust collector piping. I guess I can now delete the portable dust collector, which I've since sold. When positioning machines, I considered material in-feed and out-feed. I found it helped to mock up some 16-foot timbers to show that I had room for 8 feet of in-feed and 8 feet of out-feed. You can see how a 3D mock-up helps. Here the out-feed of the bandsaw runs over top of the jointer, and that works in real life. For positioning of your table saw, consider how you might feed an 8-foot sheet of plywood. Here you can see the total footprint that a 4x8 sheet might occupy if you allow for all possible cuts. Most of the tools you see here I pulled from SketchUp's 3D warehouse. I recently upgraded the DeWalt planer you see here to a Grizzly, so let's see if I can find something suitable in the 3D warehouse. So starting upstairs in the addition, let's make our way through the kitchen, into the laundry room, and then down the stairs to the basement and the shop. So we'll start in this corner of the shop, which features a 4x8 foot pool table that spends most of its life as a shop assembly table, work surface, temporary storage area, At the moment, you see it currently has a big pile of white cedar boards that have all been milled to dimension and are waiting to be turned into tongue and groove paneling for the inside of our sauna. It is a walkout basement with French doors that make it fairly easy to get material in through the main door and projects out, as well as big machines in. Turning our attention to the machines and the sort of usual workflow for the shop, I bring the rough material in where it usually sits on the work table temporarily, and then I will take it over to the bandsaw where I'll do rough dimensioning, resawing. Most of the time on this bandsaw I keep a nice big 1-inch Timber King bandsaw blade in play. With things cut to initial size, then I usually move over to the jointer where I will of course prepare two faces so that I have one flat face and one face that's also flat and square to that. This is an 8-inch jointer. It's a Shop Fox. It's got conventional bladed cutter head with material initially dimensioned. We then go over to the planer. I just got a new Grizzly planer, which you've probably seen featured in other videos. I had my challenges getting up and running, but now that it's running well, I really like it. I've set the height of the planer bed so that it's actually at the same level as the table saw, which works nice for infeed and outfeed. So the table saw becomes an outfeed table for long boards coming off the planer, and vice versa. The planer serves as an infeed support for long boards being cut on the table saw. Sorry about the zoom and pan there. I'm really happy with my Shop Fox table saw. This is the 1 3/4 horsepower professional model. At some point I might upgrade it to the 3 horse. You can just replace the motor. Built into the outfeed table of the table saw, I have a rudder lift. I'm using a Jessam rudder lift. I use this thing all the time. I have a dedicated Bosch 2 1/4 horse rudder body that sits in that with a convenient on-off switch built into the table saw outfeed table. I really like my table saw outfeed table. It has a series of drawers built into the side of it, which, since this is usually the rudder table, it holds all my rudder accessories and rudder bits. I really want to build a nice organizer for my rudder bits at some point. Keep my trim rudder in the bottom. Various tools that come in cases, like my drills, sit in a shelf. It also needs to get organized on that side. On the back side, I keep a few spring clamps and a power bar. I do a lot of hand sanding on this outfeed table as well. I'll just throw a padded non-slip covering on that, and then it gets used for hand sanding as well. On this side of the outfeed table, I have a series of drawers. I keep my dado set and a skill saw in this drawer, some extra rudder bodies and another battery powered saw in this drawer. Accessories for the table saw go in here, things like inserts for the dado head cutter or other zero clearance inserts get stored in there. I keep the crosscut sleds that I have in a little cubby right here. I've got 2 crosscut sleds, one that has a thick groove that I use with the dado blade, and then one that I use with a standard blade for making crosscuts on the table saw. I use both quite frequently, and they store conveniently out of the way when not in use. Again, we have the sliding compound miter saw. The dust collection for the planer gets dragged out just when it's in use, otherwise it's kind of in the way. And again, dedicated blast gate for that turns on automatically. Continuing around the shop, obviously in the miter saw station I have a whole lot of storage built in. Actually, I really want to rebuild that. It's really badly built. That was something that was left by the previous owner. You know, miscellaneous hardware storage that we all have, collection of semi-junk wood piled on the corner, as well as project wood kind of in wood storage on the end wall. And then I have a couple of kind of portable machines that I don't use as often. I have a small bandsaw that I keep a smaller blade on that's handy for small projects. It is handy to have two bandsaws. I have a drum sander that I use fairly infrequently. It's the one tool I have in my shop that I have to say I am not in love with. And then along the wall, along the stairs, I have my electrical panel, as well as all of my 220 volt machines are plugged in on this side of the shop. The jointer, the planer, the bandsaw, all are on the same, actually, 220 circuit. Single man shop, so they're only used one at a time, so a single circuit isn't a problem. Again, each machine with a dedicated dust port and a blast gate that turns the dust collection system on automatically. Some useful features overhead. I have a dust filter that's typically running when I'm in the shop. It's actually wired to the shop light so that when I leave the shop it gets turned off automatically. Electrical cords that drop down from above. Similarly, I have a compressed air cord that I pull out. Well, what stays on it most of the time is just a little gun to blow dust off things. Compressor is the one thing that I'm likely going to upgrade in my shop quite soon. Currently using just a small portable compressor. Along the wall opposite the table saw, I have a stand-up drill press. Some clamp storage stored on the wall, kind of tucked into the corner. Next to the drill press is my lathe. Not a super fancy lathe, but it works well. I was lucky enough to have that given to me by a friend. All of the lathe tools stored above that. Again, more clamp storage. My scrap wood bin sits below the clamps. And then moving along the wall, you see the dust collection for each of the machines. There's the dust collection port for the table saw. One dust collection port that's kind of just on a flexible duct that I drag around the shop and use when needed. Very handy feature is a dedicated port for a floor sweep. So when you want to clean and sweep up, you just sweep things into this. Turn on the dust collector, sweep it into the dust port, and it all goes away. Next to that, I have a little portable sharpening and sanding cart. I keep a spindle sander stored underneath it, and then all my sharpening stuff, a couple of grinders, belt sander, dedicated lapping plate, all get stored in semi-disarray on this cart. Above that, I have some battery-powered drills and screwdrivers. And then moving further to the left, I have my miter saw station with some storage underneath. One thing I added recently is this Russo dust hood that I found on Amazon. I actually find it quite effective at collecting dust from the chop saw, which is notoriously hard to collect dust from. At the far end of the shop, we have my kind of handwork station. I have a maple workbench that I'm quite proud of, that I built from a set of plans from fine woodworking that I modified myself. And then above that, not super fancy, a little tool cabinet with the tools that I use most frequently on the workbench. I have a chainsaw that I need to fix a broken handle on. Other details I've glossed over so far. This is something that's waiting for a future project. I have this 1940s era 3 horsepower, 3-phase DeWalt radial arm saw. And while radial arm saws aren't particularly popular anymore, this old beauty was available for free, and it just seemed too good to pass up. And what I want to do is rebuild the chop saw station at the back of the shop, because I don't like that to begin with, and I want to incorporate both the radial arm saw and the sliding compound miter saw in that table. I guess the final piece of the puzzle, little belt and disc sander that's portable, it just rolls around when I need it. You can see the shop lighting is pretty good. I've got a whole series of 8-foot fluorescents on the ceiling. I recently added another one over the assembly table in the corner where things were a little bit dark. I love my shop. It's taken a long time to get here, but there's pretty much nothing I can't make in here anymore. The final pièce de résistance is way back in the back corner of the old basement. Before then, you have to transfer through this hallway where we're you see it's kind of a disaster. Paint storage, store glues and all sorts of odds and ends in what used to be the old kitchen cabinets. Moving back into the basement of the very old part of our house. The house was originally built in 1848. Obviously we walked through what is a storage area into what I now call the CNC cave. I was lucky enough to find used in Pittsburgh a 4-foot by 8-foot shop-bought CNC machine with a vacuum hold-down system. I have a dedicated dust collector for it, and over here the collection of odds and ends and computer that's used to drive that. Well, that wraps things up here. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and hit the subscribe button, and thanks for watching.